The Clayton Lockett botched execution really shattered what you call a kind of theater that
Mm.
states put on by pretending as though this is all a medical procedure, that, they use alcohol swabs and medical pillows and all of the trappings of an actual legitimate medical treatment. But you say it's really not in any conceivable way a legitimate medical exercise. Can you sort of talk about why that is and why the theater of it is so convincing to so many nonetheless?
Yeah. So I call it stagecraft. And, when you think about it, like, why are they on a gurney? Why? Why do they have a white sheet? Why do you have people sometimes wearing scrubs, sometimes wearing a white coat? Why do you, as you notice, why do they swab the arm with alcohol before injecting the drugs that are going to kill them? Like, it's all stagecraft. But with that comes this aura of careful, clean, sanitary, highly regulated. And, none of that's deserved. Behind the scenes, it is a complete hot mess. And, uh, whether it's the people that are doing it or the drugs or what have you, they don't know what they're doing, but they get this bump, right? And that has made, I think that's part of the reason, Mark, that lethal injection has persisted as long as it has, is that the narrative is so strong that no, look at it, right? And it looks like they're falling asleep, right? We're putting them in anesthesia and they just drift off to forever sleep. That narrative is so strong that it's been very hard to challenge it. It's been very hard for the prisoners.
So let's challenge it here.
Let's.
Tell us what's actually happening when these prisons are to start trying to acquire the drugs that they'll use to kill people. What does that process look like?
Okay, well, so it's different in every state, but I do chronicle. So, for example, in the Clayton Lockett example, and this was a lot of fun. Maybe I shouldn't say that. I mean, not like fun, but to see the lawyer for the Department of Corrections, to hear him saying, I don't know, I looked it up, I went past the WikiLeaks. That's how he decided what drug to use, is you had a non-medical lawyer Googling it to try to figure it out. And he said, it said that it would render them unconscious. I thought that was good enough. And he said, the other thing he said that was very interesting is he said, look, I could have maybe done something else, but this was political. I was getting calls every day, sometimes a couple times a day, from the state AG, from the governor's office, from the chief of staff saying, you better figure this out, figure it out quick. And so, and then, that's just one story. Others, they're generally sending it to lawyers, but they've delegated to doctors that have more than 20 malpractice suits against them. One fellow was Fred Lecter. He presented himself to states and said, I can help you. I've got a lethal injection machine. And he said, I'm an engineer. And it turns out he didn't even have an engineering degree. He had a history degree, a BA. He ends up getting charged with fraud. So like this is how they're finding the drugs.
And let's talk about where exactly are these drugs coming from when they are able to obtain them?
All over. So the first thing to understand is that the pharmaceutical companies want absolutely nothing to do with this.
And why is that?
Well, it's against their trade interest, it's against their proprietary interest, it's against their financial interest. So I always think of, I think it's Pfizer whose tagline is life is our life's work. And I always think, well, that could be super awkward to take life is our life's work drugs and use them to cause somebody to promptly die, and all of the rest too. helping people live longer. That doesn't work. And so it feels like a Saturday Night Live skit to me when I'm looking at this. But also, they've been sued when a botched execution has happened. They've had millions of dollars divested from them when they don't have controls on their products. So it's against their interest. And that has made states do some crazy things, as you know, to get the drugs. Some of that is trying to really, I call it smuggling in to the country. Would you say it was smuggling?
Yeah,
I feel
absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
International smuggling sometimes.
International smuggling. Yes, exactly. So they bought drugs from the back of a London driving school. That was like a pharmaceutical distributor. I actually put a link to the page in the very back so people could see, because it's like you wouldn't believe this if you didn't see it for yourself. But yeah, and then also Chris Harris. So they bought these drugs from Harris Pharma, and the feds knew about Harris Pharma because Harris Pharma, which was based in India, was just a guy named Chris Harris. It was just that's all of Harris Pharma. And he connected with an actual pharmaceutical company. He was doing work at the Dubai airport selling, and people said, he's good at selling. And so he had this arrangement. He didn't work for this KM Pharmaceuticals, but he had an arrangement with them. They gave him some sample drugs to take, I think, to Africa. And he ended up selling them on the sly to Nebraska. So then the company's like, give us back our drugs. And Nebraska's like, no. And so there was litigation over that. The drugs go bad. But in any event, Harris Pharma shows up again, because even after that, Texas, Arizona, and Nebraska place a big order of the same drug with Harris Pharma. The FDA comes in, swoops down, seizes their drugs. So it's that sort of thing. Yeah. Or they're going to compounding pharmacies, and that's a story of its own.
Yeah. I would love to divert to compounding and continue on these drug stories, because they are really conscience shocking to see these states engage in what's essentially a criminal drug trafficking enterprise across transnational borders. But I want to get to the actual death chamber, and you gestured toward this earlier, but let's talk about who's actually in the room and who's actually doing the killing, because you mentioned they're sometimes in white coats, they're sometimes in scrubs. This is more of that theater of putting on a performance of an actual medical procedure. But these people don't really know what they're doing, do they?
No. No. We're looking at a bunch of executions in a bunch of different states. And so, are some better at inserting a catheter than others? Yes, probably. But we think that there are doctors doing this, and that's not the case. The people who are actually inserting the catheter are paramedics, EMTs, sometimes phlebotomists, which I then learned phlebotomists are the people that take your blood at the Red Cross. In most states, I think it's 35, 36 states, they're not even licensed to insert a catheter, and that's the work that they're doing. And then who is actually pushing the drugs? Like, who is actually injecting the chemicals? And we are poisoning people to death. Like, that's what it is. That's what lethal injection is. Who's doing that? It's non-medical prison guards in another room. So again, I need to be careful and say, in any given execution, we don't know exactly who is doing this, but I've uncovered quite a few. And even when you have a doctor involved, every doctor that I have found, and there are stories about that too, but everyone says, "Oh, but I don't push the drugs. The prison guards do that." And so there's the actual chamber where the person is, and then there's this anteroom. and that is where the executioners are. And so there's generally a couple of them in there. By the way, I thought the 3-drug protocol when I started, I thought, okay, 3-drug protocol, 1, 2, 3 syringes. Like, how complicated could this be? It's like 12 to 15 syringes. And they're color coding them. And some of these people are have some amount of color blindness. So it's just, it's problematic in so many ways. But one of the ways is, they're pushing the drugs through 7 feet of tubing is generally what it is. And when you ask them, you know, how are you doing it? They're telling you by feel through 7 feet of tubing from another room. And so it's just as one might expect. By the time they say, gee, it's hard to push the plunger, it's way too late. That person is suffering and, has a golf ball sized mound in their leg or something like that.
So we have colorblind people using color-coded syringes filled with poison illegally obtained through international drug smuggling, killing people from 7 feet away in a different room.
That was very well put.